future-proof your brain. It's a great ad copy written by ChatGPT. I can't take credit for it. Yeah, so there are examples of people in like the writer's strike citing that how they want to define how people can use ChatGPT, like that's being mentioned in a writer's strike. There's examples of artists suing AI companies, right? Because they're concerned, right? Because some of their styles are getting into models, or they're concerned about their work. There's even articles about doctors discussing about this, like could they be replaced? So it seems like there's lots of professions considering this or asking this question. So I figured like, okay, this is an interesting topic to think about. Like, what is it that you should teach yourself to future-proof yourself? And the first obvious answer is learn some programming, learn some machine learning, and yeah, you can go and learn some of this stuff, which you look, right? There's coursework for this stuff online, all for free, and lectures through open courseware through MIT.
Do you have a feeling for how long it would take someone to become one of the so-called experts?
See, that's a great.
That's through the online stuff that you've seen so far.
So like and that's a great question, because then you start thinking about the divide of like what that would mean, right? Because there's if you go and learn some of this stuff, you could be learning it from the very math heavy theory side and understanding like the math behind it. But then there is the applied side of things, which like those skills are different. They look different. And like, there's this idea of, like a black box where you just need to know enough that goes in and comes out to know enough to use it, right? And some of these models that are being open source nowadays, it's like you can still use them for something interesting or functional, but you never train the model yourself. It's just out there in the wild and people allow you access to it. So that's not really a great answer to that, but you could do it if you use programming in a matter of months. If you really want to go down and get really good at it, I mean, it's going to take years, probably at least a couple years.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the how to use it rather than what's going on inside it.
Yeah.
Because there's gonna be a lot more people in the how do I use it camp.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what's the math behind this?
Supposedly there's job posts out. I just read one last week. Paying people ridiculous hundreds of thousands of dollars for being a ChatGPT prompt engineer.
Yeah,
Which is it seems like a silly thing.
I wonder about that, whether or not those are, I think a lot of those people have computer science backgrounds or programming backgrounds. They're not.
Other people like us.
Yeah.
What
But-
does ChatGPT say it takes to become a prompt engineer?
Find out.
We should just.
One way to find
That'd
out.
be a really interesting question to
Yeah,
ask.
let's ask it.
I
Why
bet you the
not?
term's not even in there.
Oh, you know what? That's a
Right,
great.
because prompt engineer would have been around a few years ago. Yep.
No, I think prompt engineer was around in research circles for a while.
Yeah.
What's a prompt engineer? Yeah, there you go. Start there. Well, it should be able to do that.
Yeah.
Let's say that. See what it says.
Well, it's hard to say.
Oh, it's not familiar.
Oh, you were correct. You
Yeah.
stumped him. Mr. Wizard. Stuck in the past. Mr. Wizard is stuck.
Within a particular industry, huh?
You.
I mean, like, I was talking to Rick the other day, and he was talking about this language programming tool he's been thinking about. And he kind of walked me through 15 different prompts that he gave ChatGPT in a row in order to create what he needed. Oh, no, it was maybe some document he needed for Word. Well, that's pretty impressive. I can see people wanting to purchase that kind of skills. There you go. There's your career path.
So it's- yeah, machine learning.
I mean,
That is career.
so I think 3 to 6 months, learn Python 1 to 2 months. So that's like 8 months there, 3 months, it's 11 months, another 6 months. That's here. I mean, Yeah, it's starting to get up there. I mean, it's about 2 years and then specialization and advanced. I mean, it's still build a portfolio. And that's what ChatGPT says, right? So it's a couple years at least.
But it's not including, having, for a specific industry, there's a certain amount of domain knowledge that you need.
Yes, exactly, right? Because it's
Yeah,
one
right,
thing to
like
know.
Python. Right?
Yeah.
Python.
Really counting how it takes to actually know the specific stuff. Let's say in industry.
Yeah, no,
Right.
exactly. Domain knowledge,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is just like like
Let's say
you
your
know how to build
biology or-
something, but you don't know how to apply it to a field
Mhm.
that would care. Like, hey, how do I make this thing?
Mhm.
Yeah, you have to be a real stallion. I don't know if you guys know this joke, right? Of HBO, Silicon Valley. They're like, oh, we got the best coders, and they turn and look, and it's like a bunch of people who are like sniffling and kind of somewhat ugly, I guess, and just like really zoned in. And they're like, yeah, there are stallions, our expert top coders, and it was just like a recurring dumb joke.
Joel Travolta was sitting on 5-hour energy.
That's one of my
Today.
favorite TV shows. I love that show. That was so spot on, right?
It was too good for what it was.
If you've ever worked in tech, yeah, you've seen every one of those characters. You might have been one of them.
But yeah,
Bart knows what a prompt engineer is, by the way.
Oh,
Yep.
Art does.
I haven't played
Give me a
around with
paragraph.
it at all.
I just literally did it just for that Elon Musk thing.
yeah, the cage match or whatever they're doing. But yeah, it's worth knowing that, like, okay, for artificial intelligence, right, machine learning is a subset, deep learning is another subset of that. And then like some of the stuff that like I think like what ChatGPT would be considered is like basically like an expert system, which would be crossing all these boundaries, right? Like it would be, not just like one of these things. It's like they're layering multiple things happening, right? And yeah, I mean, it's hard to learn programming, machine learning. It's not for everyone. That's why in this section I said the naive and not for everyone approach, because I've sat through tutoring people and there's some people who just like they can't spend the time and they just can't learn it because they just don't have the ability to sit in front of a computer focused. It's just not them. But people who do want to learn programming and machine learning, a good introduction is video games and modding them and changing them. And this is Minecraft apparently changed into a Pokemon game, which I think is just funny looking. And apparently, when you're you could start doing that in Python and Java, and you could start hosting your own games and things like that. It's probably a good way to get people into learning those technical skill sets. And apparently it has no skill ceiling because if you go and look, here's
Other tab.
yeah, if only this little zoom bar was in this.
If only you can drop it down,
Yeah, apparently, OpenAI trained a model specifically to learn how to play Minecraft with pre-training it. So they went through the effort of, and this was, it was about a year ago, actually. And they, got it to start playing and doing things and trying to beat the game and go through and build things and make stuff. And they went through all that effort, so there's no skill ceiling to all of this. Is my point, meaning like the people who are absolutely at the top in terms of, knowing what they're doing are still playing games. And then, for more practical advice is to learn about some of the stuff that's going on with like large language models and how to use them for your job, right? Like, for example, Bob today was showing me about, he's trying to get help with setting up NGINX or setting up streaming so that way he could do a plugin for his website stuff. So that way he can work without bothering the guy who writes the original code and asking him a million questions, instead asking like, okay, how do I set up this thing? Because I have one system that's slightly different. And so how do I adjust for that? Learning how to use it for your job is amazing, right? some of the things that are kind of interesting to note, right, is this idea of like, ChatGPT is basically kind of like a tutor, right? You could like learn new skills from it when used correctly. And for $20 a month, that's a cheap tutor. It'd be pretty expensive to get tutoring in any subject. It's worth knowing that like ChatGPT is also like kind of the new generation of search engine, right? With and it's almost interesting to see like there's different incentives, right? So I was asking ChatGPT like, how do you compare yourself against Google? And it went through and it did that. But the follow-up question I think is more interesting is, how do the business models behind ChatGPT and Google differ? Are there any perverse incentives for either? And it went on to say that like for Google, it's primarily based on advertising. They offer free services, but like this could potentially create perverse incentives such as prioritizing user engagement over the quality of content. And that's kind of a big difference. Whereas like I think it was saying for itself, like the fact that there's a free tier and a paid tier means that they'd be prioritizing the paid users first. But like to think about like, okay, when you're going for a source of information to learn something new, you're paying for the quality of the content, which
Sorry.
I think is interesting to think about, right? Yeah, and so a bunch of students are already teaching themselves stuff, right? There's yeah, go ahead.
Can I share my Seinfeld story?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've been using ChatGPT for writing posts for my podcast. And lately I've been telling them to write it in the style of the Jerry Seinfeld. And it's been writing like some pretty funny kind of stand-up jokes on it. And I've been watching it do it like 3 times. And today I sat down there to write a post. And I did it without asking ChatGPT at all. ChatGPT taught me the pattern that Seinfeld uses for his stand-up, which I thought was pretty interesting. I don't know how else I could have easily have learned that, other than maybe watching a bunch of his, which I think I
That's
have,
pretty
but
crazy.
somehow or other I haven't. Just watching him, somehow or other I haven't fully distilled it.
Yeah, you never sat there with pencil and paper and like reflected and gone back and forth on like, is this good? Is this not? Because you're like consuming it, not like producing it, right? Which, yeah, so I think there's that, yeah, the fact that like there's that concentration on that task.
So it's actually making me a better writer, which is interesting because today's daily New York Times, The Daily, had a fascinating episode on college kids, and they interviewed a professor in the first half and a bunch of kids, students in the second half, and talked about the inner pull and the pull and the knocking of different things that people are aspiring. The professor's trying to aspire students to be excited about a topic, and the students are trying to get a good GPA so they can get a good job. and they both. I liked your word, perverse incentives.
Yeah.
That's a great way of looking at it, and it makes me wonder if that's what.
Say your word or ChatGPT's word.
That is actually something I already knew.
Oh,
That just like the idea that there's a system or a process or a situation where there's incentives that go against the whole point of something, right?
This is
Yeah.
classic economics.
Yeah.
This is what Freakonomics always talks about. People put
Yeah.
incentives in, and you actually get side effects that you weren't expecting. So I'm wondering if this will all get cleaned up eventually. That's all.
So yeah, people are already using ChatGPT to tutor themselves or use it for school, right? And there's like surveys about this.
I see you had Khan Academy on there,
Yeah,
which is pretty awesome.
yeah, so there's surveys about that have been conducted, talking to students and their parents and like how they use it and all of that. And I think that's kind of interesting. So like students already kind of understand like there's at least a useful tool, whether or not they're like trying to actively learn from it, right? Or if they're accidentally learning, maybe, right, by doing it. And it's interesting because like Chegg, which is like a homework service. I think I talked about this a couple months ago. Their stock plummeted like after their first quarter earnings because they basically said like, yeah, we're competing with ChatGPT. Like their revenue was down, and then like their stock plummeted the next day, and they had even already started working on something called Checkmate, which was like their own large language model, and Khan Academy, they created their own, right? So for their curriculum, which they have a bunch, right? All the math, like pretty much majority of math that you'd want to learn.
Not just math.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other subjects. There's some programming subjects as well, some basic stuff, and they even have like some bullet points, which makes me wonder like, did they generate these with ChatGPT or not? But they talk about like how to best use like something like ChatGPT, meaning like be clear and specific, check multiple sources, understand the limitations, potential biases, errors in the data. Supplement it with, this is a supplemental tool, practice critical thinking. But yeah, I mean, they made their own, AI tool, right? I thought it might be worth playing this. Let's see.
I need to
You,
mute myself.
Yourself, yeah.
So Eric's got a question. Jackson, who
Mhm.
came on later on.
Yeah,
Do colleges have a tool to check if an assignment is all AI?
so there are tools that claim that they can do it. They can
But-
be easily bypassed.
Yeah.
Like there is, as far as I'm aware, for
Yeah.
text generated by AI, people can get past any of the plagiarism detectors.
Yeah.
Unless they're doing naive, they're just typing in stuff
Well,
and then just copying and pasting verbatim, because there is a guy at OpenAI that works, and his sole job is meant to like make it so like there's some trace amounts that it's been generated by AI. Supposedly, that's something I've heard. I don't know how true it is, but like it's probably only for the most basic default responses. And you almost even notice that like some of the responses, like they'll always do like a assertion of what you've already said, explain like give you what you want, and then give you commentary. But then also like at the beginning of the paragraphs, you'll see like there's commas, like it'll be like a phrase, comma, full sentence, like the rest of the sentence, and it does that pattern quite a bit. Like I've noticed that only if you're not changing it up, things like that.
yeah.
But but I think anyone who's used it long enough, like, there's no detectors that I think work for the text that I'm aware of.
In the episode I listened to this morning on Daily, he was able to pull it off.
Yeah, and he's actually getting great on this stuff.
He got an A on it. Yeah.
It's like a
This is-
history
This is like a
something.
200 level history.
Yeah.
Very good. And he said that what he did was he had ChatGPT write the article. then he gave them a copy of his writing style. Then he said, rewrite it in my writing style. Then he went in there and changed a few words, misspelled a few things.
I think the trick that a lot of courses are doing right now, especially on the graduate level. I know my daughter's she's a painting and drawing instructor, and you think, well, how does that relate, right? But a lot of it is explaining your work, explaining your idea, and backing up anything that's written by, by coaching, by conversation, by interviews, and through reviews of the work and how people are working. So I think a lot of things are moving from just a written type thing to more of a coaching type of a scenario, or a way to check and make sure that the people really understand the material that they're talking about. And we've had a lot of little conversations about that with her and I back and forth. So pretty interesting what she's hearing from her other academics there at Boise State. So
Yeah, I mean, I had my friend text me right after I hit publish on this blog post, and he could immediately, I think he said something that immediately told me like he knew some of the stuff is AI generated, like, because some of the metaphors I'm using are just not something I would write, right? And he knows that, right? And so, it's like if somebody's style just changes suddenly, right? Like that's a giveaway in terms of, if somebody's plagiarizing.
can you fool it? I guess the answer is hell yeah.
The answer is yes, but I think it's the smart kids that are going to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's probably easy right now, but it's going to be hard over time.
Well, hopefully it gets to be at a level where it may be just as easy just to have written the paper yourself than to go through all the.
I mean, so far, but though, like, how do you, like, the thing is, how do you know if it's almost like a Turing test at that point? Like, is it that person's writing? Because there's been a professor who's accused his class of using ChatGPT because he ran it through one of these plagiarism detectors online, thinking it was like a foolproof plagiarism detector. It's like, no. And so he he got in a lot of trouble for
That
that.
professor specifically said, he goes, I feel like every day is a Turing test.
Yeah.
Did he actually say that? Yeah.
Yeah, this was not a software guy.
Yeah.
He was middle European history expert.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was trying to come up with the idea of like timeless skills and ideas, right? Things that never go out of fashion, right? They're like jeans for the brain. I generated a picture of jeans being worn by the brain, right? But like trying to come up with some ideas of like, what are things people should always know about, or like, think about, right? And I think one of them is like the idea of like managing resources, right? Like the idea of like and I think most people would say time management, or the ability to like manage your time, manage what manage your finances, manage your relationships, right? Like I think like I break that down into my head, like those 4 things. And I think like that's a skill that like surpasses any one subject, or right, like just things that people could teach themselves more about. Learn about like the way that we're kind of flawed in our thinking naturally, like cognitive biases, logical fallacies, things like that. I think that like goes beyond any specific profession. It's very abstract, but it's basically like foundation for critical thinking, right? And then you can also get this poster and fall victim to the G.I. Joe fallacy, meaning thinking like, since you know about it, that means, that's half the work. You could work on being able to communicate, talk to people, right? Being able to, be able to communicate what you're trying to, tell people, because some people just can't do that. And that's a sales.
Can you read that
comment? Let's see. It says, how can I learn about your company's need if you keep interrupting? That's a sales. That's good. That's good. Yeah. This gets mentioned quite a lot when you're like in college, usually like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of the idea of like You know, it's like, yeah, beer and pizza, right? And then, you know, the things that people, normally it's represented as a triangle, but I thought this was interesting because it shows it as a graph. But, you know, the idea of like, there are things you need, and then once those needs are satisfied, going up in terms of like, but people in different points in their life are actually at different stages, and recognizing that and being able to like work with other people and understand like, oh, they're dealing with something specific, or, you know, that, you know, being able to navigate stuff like that.
I wonder if that's where the name for the Maslow CNC came from.
Maybe.
I don't
I
know.
never understood
Okay.
where they got that name, but maybe this is it.
Could be.
Yeah, but like, yeah, because I mean, it's tough to think about things that are like go and they don't relate to any one specific job, or like are still skills people need no matter what. And so, you know, if you want to get better at any of these, you might be able to learn some from ChatGPT, probably. You know, with this being said, all this stuff assumes like, okay, jobs can be replaced by computers and robots. And like, you know, if saying that is true, I mean, is that true tomorrow? Probably not, right? But like, could it be true one day? Like, sure. Is it going to happen in my lifetime? Maybe not, right?
Yes.
Um,
Everything I've read says it's gonna be like accountants. It's gonna be,
My accountant's scared. I
it's,
was with him
it's
today.
gonna be white. it's
Yeah.
gonna be white collar workers.
and so this
It's
last
not
part,
gonna be plumbers, it's not gonna be
No.
construction workers, electricians, it's not gonna be those people. They'll always have a job.
well, so this last part is
Hands-on stuff.
Yeah.
well, this last part is considering like, okay, what is going to go the opposite way in terms of like, you know, why is it difficult to replace people's jobs? And yeah, developing machine learning is incredibly difficult. Programming new models incredibly difficult. Yeah, just programming in general takes time. That's not going to happen overnight. There's also regulation, right? There's a comic of yeah, I just don't get it. She's just arbitrarily starts banging on the ceiling. It's not like we are having a party. You know, we could always leave. There are plenty of other apartments in the city. And this one was for crypto, but I just crossed off crypto, put AI, but regulation in the US.
See, I love that because crypto has been like Sisyphus. It's been trying to push this rock up the hill and keep rolling back down. It's not really getting anywhere. This shit is like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, there's a big difference. Yes.
Huge difference.
Yeah. I think I was trying to, Pat and I were talking about this, and we were saying like, I was making the point that this is a general purpose. We're at the point of a general purpose AI model, which is something different because it's the idea that like you can take it and you can use it for like a bunch of different things. And that's almost like a general purpose computer. You could take it, use it for a bunch of different things. Because like, you know, I was having a conversation saying like, you know, I can think of it as a really good tutor. And it's like, oh, I can think of it as a really good this, a really good that, right? And, you know, and that might be why, like, at this point, I'm just considering a general purpose AI model.
You didn't mention Overlord.
Overlord.
Supreme Ruler.
Yes. There is some kind of like theory about the idea of like, you if you're not helping AI become like, you know, a supreme Skynet, that you're going to be hunted down one day when it knows in hindsight that you didn't help or something. Like that's a
Yeah.
Bob,
Ooh,
wasn't there some
you
guys
were
that
not an assistant to
Yeah.
me.
you didn't help me get rise. Yeah.
Bob, wasn't there some guys had a podcast called Robot Overlords that used to go to
I think,
computing?
yeah, I think
talks
you're
about
right.
computing?
Yeah. I don't remember what that was all about. I
There was two
don't
of them.
know. The look in the old notes. We got a lot of them out there.
Robot, I think it was the podcast called Robot Overlords. Beware the, something like that.
So one of the points that I think is worth making is developing physical technology slows things down immensely, right? If you're just developing software, right? Like, so AI that's purely software based, that could maybe happen pretty fast. You know, if you're like a knowledge worker, an accountant, potentially replacing an accountant might be fast, but replacing something that requires manual labor and also be able to perform things in a smart way. Like that, you have to make a physical robot to do that, and it has to be intelligent, right? So that's a lot more complexity. And kind of to like show that
I think that's partly where the AI is different, but so many of these transitions in the past.
Mhm.
When the automobile came along, it replaced horses and buggies, but it was physical replacing physical.
Mhm.
And basically you could move there with training on how to do the automobile and stuff, how to make wagon wheels.
Mhm.
Now, even if you look at the personal computer, it replaced some physical stuff. Like the manual ledgers,
Mhm.
but you still had to do the manual, enter the data into the computer.
Mhm.
It was so, now you got something that's replacing non-physical stuff and making some of that stuff just a whole lot easier and faster.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the other things replace blue collar jobs,
Mhm.
and this one's looking to replace white collar jobs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a whole different set of people excited.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to point out, which is going back to this developing, physical technology is much more difficult. You tour an Amazon facility. I've done this once before. This isn't a picture I've taken, but here's a guy. He's working alongside robots. Those little robots at the bottom of those stacks of bins there go around the warehouse, and they just bring it in front of them, and they, he picks the items and puts them in a different box, right? But then it begs the question, like, why does he exist there? Like, why is that job there? Why is there not another robot there, right? And it's because it's actually really difficult to create a robot that does that, right? The idea, if I see, no, that's not it. But yeah, the idea of like even billionaires have problems picking up objects with the right amount of pressure. As companies like Amazon literally host competitions to just pick and place objects. This is like from like 2016 of like some team reflecting on like the challenges of doing this, but like just the idea that like a robot picks up an object, it could be a wide variety of objects like that, and it doesn't crush it, right? Like, how do you know how much pressure to exert on an object so you don't break it or damage the item, and it makes it safely to the person, right? So like stuff like that is the reason why like Amazon hasn't automated away that job, because they've got the engineering for it. They've got the financial resources for it. It's like there's nothing that would, slow them down in a certain sense, except like it's a difficult engineering problem, and it takes time. But what's interesting is now there's all these AI things that have happened within the last year or two. Maybe it makes solving this kind of problem easier, right? But like it's something worth considering. And then, self-driving cars, right? That those don't really exist right now. We've got highway cruising, right? Like you could do that, but it's not considered fully, like it's not fully autonomous. You're not just letting go and going from one spot to another.
Taking a nap.
Yeah, taking a nap the whole way there, right? You just, you can only do that on the highway if you've got like a Tesla or whatever, right? But yeah. But yeah, so that's what I got for that post, right? I'm just trying to consider like the whole
Your
jobs thing.
metaphor, I think the metaphor you have for the PC is spot on. This is the same kind of disruptive technology as what the PC was. Everything in between has been just iterate, it's just been incremental. This is a true.
It's gonna be interesting to spell out what you thought the really big technological advances were through the last 500 years. And I bet you see it was this long between the first and the second.
I wonder if we could get Chat GPT to do that for us.
Smash it together.
Well, they used to say they were coming faster and it's slowing
Or we
down.
can get Chat GPT.
At the turn of the 19th century,
That'd be
they
interesting.
were inventing stuff so fast that completely reinvented lights, telephone, automobiles, airplanes, it just, sulfur drugs. It's just, nothing is being invented at that kind of rate right now.
Really?
Or it's so specialized in understanding that it's not,
There is innovation, there is change. It's not like there isn't, but not like huge. It's not like we're all going to Mars, you know, everybody's flying to Mars. Everybody's like.
It's not
everybody's
affecting
living all
a
of sudden
large
living
number
to
of the
200 years. We're all living to be 200 years old. Some new drug was invented, something. It's not stuff like, that's what it was like back then. People went from living like 50 years old and dying
Right.
to like 75 years old and dying. I mean, you know, 3 out of 10 kids died in childbirth. Then went down to like, these changes have been huge. There was no flight.
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you're a certain age, these things you experience were pretty phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
You went from no electric lights to seeing airplanes fly, and if you live long enough, you saw man on the moon,
Yes.
all in one lifetime.
Right.
So that is a good.
It's
thing.
stuff's not going that fast.
Which seems wrong to me, because now the information you need to develop those kinds of breakthrough new things is available everywhere. Everybody has access to
See,
it.
I don't think it's about the tools. It's about-
You think we're running to the limits of our brains?
No, I think these things are bursty. Sometimes they happen, and sometimes it gets a wave. These things are seasonal, and maybe the seasons are 200 years long. Who knows?
There's different motivations. I mean, motivation's got something to do with it.
It's kind of interesting at
I think the
the,
lean is sort of on information nowadays, as people tend to think about. I think there are like many breakthroughs, in the past 20-30 years, that are, on the information side, like all the software we're using, count that as a breakthrough. It is a breakthrough for a computer experience, where you think of the systems iterated, it's not really tangible, but you can use it, like, you can perceive it.
like the spreadsheet being a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a huge piece of software.
Or just-
That exists everywhere.
just-
That was one of the first I asked about.
Instead of-
Yeah.
Physical.
For some people.
Yeah, no, but it's just like the idea of like, that's so normal now. And like, even nowadays, people are coming up like, we're gonna make the spreadsheet
but keep
Google
going, keep going.
Doc sheets, you know?
I was just sort of thinking, it might be like this analogy of evolution, see how, for the, I don't know, evolving something physically takes a ton of years, millions of years, right? So, compared to our ancestors, a few million years ago, I don't think we've changed a bit, or at least not too much, but our brains have been rapidly evolving. And maybe that's sort of what's also happening in our world now. It's like infrastructure isn't changing as much as information is changing. But I still think big breakthroughs will happen this century.
oh God,
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised there's not another 19th century kind of like rush in the next 100 years.
until
Kind of makes
Chat
it clear
GPT,
Will be those next things.
yeah.
Yeah, put
Well-
money on that, right?
That's really, yeah, that's really where it's at though, right? Yeah. So it's interesting at DrupalCon in Pittsburgh, which I was at right after the first of the month. That was one of the keynote pieces, was talking about innovation and change and how it goes in cycles and how this gets onto that. It was a really interesting perspective that he laid out. And then part of that also included the OpenAI module, which is just now recently released and shown through the thing. But it was really an interesting, really fun thing to get there with everybody and hear their perspective on all these things again. And anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but I just thought I'd mention that. This is not something that nobody's thinking about. A lot of people are thinking about this, and it's kind of where Drupal is trying to go now, is to really shorten the timeline on innovation. And I think we're gonna see a lot of that coming very shortly, so.
You know, it's
Pretty
interesting though, you've got all these technologies that are supposed to be productivity improvers. But productivity in business has not really improved in the last 3 decades.
Right.
Well, you can actually,
How do you measure that?
I don't know how. I'm not,
so I actually,
that's a good question. I don't know how the economists do that.
I've read that in terms of like for, I think it's like for Fortune 500 companies, like if you look at like the revenue per employee, it goes up, right? But the number of employees,
Dollars or
I don't remember I'd have to find the exact thing, but the idea is that like
that would
the
be
number of
information.
people it would take to, I think $1 million worth of revenue per that company has gone down over time. Meaning like, that means like they're more
so you could
efficient.
generate $1 million worth of revenue with a lot less people.
Yeah, and
That seems believable,
Yeah.
You got all these technologies to do a lot of the manual labor things that used to be done. What's that?
A small consulting house can make a build.
But the thing is what we demand is more now. It used to be adequate for marketing, that I print some billboards and I have some handouts and I do a direct mail flyer.
Mhm.
Now I gotta get social media influencers, and I gotta get people making little videos, and YouTube
It's
shorts,
really-
TikToks.
Just trying to keep Fox.Build
This
in
is,
people's minds, there's no way I can keep up.
it's a ton of money, and the ROI is even questionable on this stuff, but everybody does it.
Right, because you feel like you have to.
You feel like you have to,
Mhm.
Or the other
to
people
look
are gonna
like
get ahead.
otherwise you don't, that's right.
That's
So-
true. I think people are being bombarded by many, many, many more choices
Oh,
than
absolutely.
they used to, and from all directions.
Right, there's too much choice.
There's
Too many
so-
places. Go down the aisle of grocery store.
Well,
Too
and
How many do you order?
so if you're not out there, if you're not out there pounding them all the time, you get overlooked or forgot.
Yeah,
well, so then this is one of those other things where like this AI technology that's like all like large language models, the text to image generators, all these like tools that are just going to create a bunch of software tools that just generate content. And it's not necessarily going to make it easier for all people. It's just going to make things a lot noisier, because you're going to have a bunch more people who have the ability to generate tons of content insanely quickly.
Well, it's like Google is. Not all of them are good.
Yeah, but it
right,
just,
right.
but like even still, like it's going to be a lot of just stuff that you now are competing against, right? If you're just making any kind of any form of content. One of the things that because you mentioned like the invention of flying, I think, and a while ago when it was a few years ago when I was writing about like automation, and I thought it was interesting to think about like because people were the time like I think it was Andrew Yang was like running for president, and he was running only on the campaign
Yeah.
about like automation and jobs and like how it's so important. And it was interesting. So I went through and thought through all that stuff and wrote a blog post or whatever and just posted a bunch of things. But at the time I remember thinking like comparing, okay, like is AI even possible? Like in the what sense that like could you replace a person? And so like when you got to the point of like before flight was an invention, right? You could see birds, these creatures flying around, and then we went and started flying around as well, right? And the proof of it being possible was that the other thing existed, right? And so I remember thinking at the time, like, yeah, we can create a perfect replication of a person because the proof is the fact that somebody else is sitting next to you, right? Right. The idea that like we can already do that, we just can't. We're doing it through biological processes, right? And whether or not it's, economical, right, or cheap to do to replace like the thinking of another person is a whole nother question. But the fact that you could create another, intelligence, like I remember thinking like, no, it is possible. Like, and that was something that I thought about like a few years ago. And I thought like, because like then like that assumption is kind of interesting to think about, right? Like, cause like that, so in my head, like I kind of proved it to myself that like, yes, it's possible, right? But I wasn't expecting this stuff to happen within my lifetime in the sense that like feels real, right? Like if it feels more real, and I was expecting this, like not to see this kind of stuff start to happen.
Well, I remember buying like a 3-volume set on artificial intelligence probably 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
And it was, and I never read all 3 books, but it was like, we're gonna see this in the next 10 years. And then 10 years, we're
Yeah,
gonna see this.
so when
in
you
the next
start-
10 And that's been going on for most of my life.
When you
Right.
start adding,
And now here it is. It's like, holy crap.
Something close to that
Right.
finally got here.
when you start adding a prediction of when something's going to happen, it's more than likely wrong. Like, usually
it's
the
a
neural
prediction
networks-
that's- Especially if it's about the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What neural networks,
I remember.
they were writing algorithms for that in the early 60s.
Yeah,
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, there's AI research that's been going back.
It didn't really catch on for a long.
It's because they hit some walls.
What was it, 1950 last week?
It was mostly because of the infrastructure, like computation was a lot harder.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah, but also like
The cost would have been
Oh, geez,
Yeah.
Louise, well, IBM 360, what had it been?
39.
yeah, they also didn't put in that much effort, like investors didn't, back then, because like they didn't see a lot of the payoff.
Yeah, I mean, right now you're seeing people put a lot of money into it,
Yeah.
and they see the payoff because it's like it's definitely where
Throwing billions at it.
there's growing quite a lot.
There were some companies that were trying to develop custom chips to do it, to do neural networks.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll happen to them.
Yeah.
Like, Legut has a lot of those chips.
Yeah.
Specializing. That's why their stock went up so much.
Yeah, because they're just kind of the default go-to for AI researchers. And I mean, there are other like graphics cards that could be and other hardware that existed. It just seems to be that since it was so popular amongst the researchers, that like they just defaulted to it, and then
They're in the arms business. You don't care what the battle is, they've got the right tools.
they got the shovels and pickaxes.
Shovels and the pickaxes.
Yeah. And, yeah. Well,